everybody, welcome to the Young Turks. I'm your host, Anna Kasparian. And yes, I am still doing the show from home today, but I should be back in the studio very, very soon. It's Wednesday, which means I'll be hosting the first hour solo, and we're gonna get into a lot of interesting topics today, including Abby Martin, a journalist with the Empire Files, asking Pelosi an important question about how the defense industry is contributing to climate change. We're also gonna give you some highlights from Kyle Rittenhouse's testimony during the trial, something that was pretty unexpected, to be quite honest with you. It's not very common for the individual facing homicide charges to take the stand. Usually that happens when they think it'll help the case. And so we'll get into some of the moments from his testimony, which last I was watching, he was still testifying. It's this entire day of testimony from Rittenhouse. Later on in the show, we'll also talk about what is leading to the high gas prices that many of us have already experienced at the pump. Seems like a lot of people are frustrated and upset, understandably so, as a result of those higher gas prices. But I do think it's important to look at market manipulation and why we're seeing the prices skyrocket as they are. Later in the second hour, we're giving John Iadarola a little bit of a break, but have no fear, Wosny Lambre will be joining me to talk about other issues, including an opulent wedding that was officiated by Nancy Pelosi, furthering the narrative that she is a hypocrite, especially when it comes to issues related to the climate. Now, before we get to all of that, as I always do, please, I'm just definitely recommending that you guys like and share the stream, get the word out about our show. And of course, as always, I appreciate that. And that's it. Let's get to our first story. Abby Martin from the Empire Files got a chance to ask House Speaker Nancy Pelosi about how the Pentagon contributes to the climate crisis during the COP26 summit. Now, you can tell that Nancy Pelosi really had no idea who Abby Martin was, because had she known who Abby Martin was and had she been familiar with Abby Martin's excellent reporting, she maybe wouldn't be willing to call on her to ask a question. But nonetheless, Pelosi saw it as an opportunity to provide the optics of caring about gender equality just by the very nature of calling on Abby Martin, a woman, to ask her a question. Let's hear how this all started out.
Wait a minute, I want a woman, I want a woman, a woman, a woman. Yeah. Gender equality here.
That moment is so indicative of what you can expect from the Democratic Party today, right? Just giving you the optics of inclusion and tolerance and caring about diversity and gender equality, but again, when it comes to actual substantive policy, something I argue all the time, Democrats don't deliver. So it's cute when you kneel in a kente cloth because you want to provide the optics of caring about the African-American community. But how about pass the police reform that the community has been demanding? It's cute when you pretend to care about women and equality for women, or creating a better society for women to succeed in. But how about you fight a little more, aggressively in regard to paid family leave, in regard to providing affordable childcare. But of course, when it comes to fighting aggressively on those matters, Nancy Pelosi gives up quite easily. But nonetheless, that's not what this topic is about. I want to go to Abby Martin now, who asks an important question.
Speaker Pelosi, you just presided over a large increase in the Pentagon budget. This Pentagon budget is already massive. The Pentagon is a larger polluter than 140 countries combined. How can we seriously talk about net zero if there is this bipartisan consensus to constantly expand this large contributor to climate change, which is exempt from these conferences? Military is exempt from climate talks.
Now, I wanted to kind of take that question separately and give you guys a little more context before we get to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi's answer on it, which, as you can imagine, was a disappointing answer. But nonetheless, I think that the question asked there was first of all, unusual given the conferences that typically take place, the type of questions that are typically asked. You very rarely hear individuals hold Americans, officials' feet to the fire, especially when it comes to something as serious as our military spending, our defense spending, and what Abby Martin mentioned there is 100% accurate. So I went back to look at some data regarding what she said, right, in the context of that question. And here's what we know. The US military is one of the largest polluters in history, consuming more liquid fuels and emitting more climate changing gases than most medium-sized countries. If the United States military were a country, its fuel usage alone would make it the 47th largest emitter of greenhouse gases in the world, sitting between Peru and Portugal. But I'm not done yet. I really want to hone in on just how bad the military is when it comes to serving as a polluter, serving as a huge factor in the climate crisis. So for instance, in 2017, according to Quartz, the US military bought about 269,230 barrels of oil a day and emitted more than 25,000 kilotons of carbon dioxide by burning those fuels. In fact, the US Air Force purchased $4.9 billion worth of fuel, and the Navy $2.8 billion, followed by the Army at $947 million, and the Marines at $36 million. So there's quite a bit of fossil fuel consumption by the Defense Department. And so the question is not only valid, it's an incredibly critical, important question to ask during a summit that's supposed to tackle the climate crisis. Now, Abby Martin mentioned the Pentagon being exempt. What did she mean by that? Well, the United States insisted on an exemption for reporting military emissions in the 1997 Kyoto Protocol. The loophole was closed by the Paris Accord, but with the Trump administration due to withdraw from the accord in 2020, which of course he did, that gap did return, right? So this Quartz article is a little older. I believe it was published in 2018, but nonetheless, the data is still relevant, and the data is what Abby Martin is referencing in the context of her question. Now, to be fair, the military has attempted to get a little bit greener, but not by much. In fact, it's negligible when you look at the data. The military has invested in developing alternative energy sources like biofuels, but these comprise only a tiny fraction of spending on fuels. It remains the single largest institutional consumer of hydrocarbons in the world. It has also locked itself into hydrocarbon-based weapon systems for years to come by depending on existing aircraft and warships for open-ended operations. And of course, when it comes to the topic of military spending, you guys don't need me to tell you, it takes priority over social safety net programs. It takes priority over providing paid family leave, takes priority over paying for childcare so parents can, go to work and feel comfortable doing so. So just to give you the latest numbers in regard to the National Defense Authorization Act, the House, which of course Nancy Pelosi is the speaker of, voted 316 to 113 to pass a $777.9 billion defense policy bill. That's for 1 year. That's for fiscal year 2022. In fact, the fiscal year 2022 NDAA included an amendment to add an additional $23.9 billion to the defense budget. Representative Mike Rogers, a Republican from Alabama, proposed the amendment, which was approved by the House panel in early September. Now, with all of that context, which again, I think is so important to really understand the gravity of the question being asked here, why don't we go to the first individual who tried to take a shot at answering it. This is Representative Frank Pallone. And his answer, not good, very bad. Let's watch.
The sea level rise is an important part of what's happening to the climate. And I am not a defense person, but I've had so many talks with the Defense Department, with the Navy in particular, about how they have to respond to what's going on. So I really do think that there is no reason why what we're putting together, with Build Back Better and other things can't respond to the Defense Department and have the same impact in terms of reducing emissions. And I do think that the Defense Department is very much aware of the fact that they have to play a major role, both from a strategic as well as, for the good of the world. So I don't see what we're doing in any way, or increasing the defense budget, as being something that's inconsistent with climate action. I really don't.
Pelosi's answer really failed to give any specifics. It was pretty vague. Really, all you could do is speculate as to what he's referring to, because he does say that the Defense Department is incredibly important in responding to the sea level rise. Now, think about what sea level rise translates to. It translates to a migration crisis, certainly in parts of the world where people can no longer live as a result of flooding, extreme weather events, those kinds of things. And when you have these mass migrations, how do you think the United States intends to respond to that? So luckily, Nancy Pelosi did jump in later, and she got a little more specific. Let's watch.
National security advisors all tell us that the climate crisis is a national security matter. It is, of course, a health matter for our children, the water they drink, the air they breathe, etc. It is a jobs issue between good, clean technologies being the future of our workforce and the training for all of that. It is a national security issue because of the all of the conditions that climate crisis produces. I won't go into all of them, but they are cause for migration, conflict over habitat and resources.
Oh, migration, conflict. We need the Defense Department, right? Rather than doing its part to respond to the climate crisis appropriately, the United States is doing exactly what the United States can be expected to do. Let's beef up military spending, because we might need the military to provide national security when our behavior over decades has contributed to a planet that people have difficulty living on because of extreme weather conditions, because of flooding, because of extreme heat, drought, wildfires, all of those issues. Now, of course, we're experiencing some of that within our own borders. And she's not really focusing on that much, but she is focusing on the problems that will arise and have already begun to arise as a result of the climate crisis. Our inaction, our unwillingness to respond to climate change appropriately is going to lead to all sorts of conflict, which is precisely why the Pentagon sees climate change as a national security threat. Instead of doing something to prevent those threats from taking place, the United States government has decided, we'll do some stuff around the edges, kind of, maybe, not really. And then if things get really bad, we can rely on the military to close our borders, protect our borders, prevent, migrants from trying to come in as a result of what we've contributed to in destroying their own homeland. And that's how we're gonna respond to it. So yeah, we need to increase military spending. It's a scary, scary world when we need to rely on private military contractors to save us from the damage that is done from climate change, right? Or the consequences that will come as a result of climate change. But that's what Nancy Pelosi is essentially saying there. Listen, when it comes to military spending, it's really a bipartisan issue. Democrats and Republicans love it. The National Defense Authorization Act passes without any trouble at all. And really, the only solace I feel or get in talking about this story is that for once we have an actual journalist, Abby Martin, asking a real question during the summit that purports to care about climate change, that purports to want to find real solutions to at least slow down the climate crisis. So good on Abby Martin. Everyone check out Empire Files. It's a great channel on YouTube, and they cover all sorts of foreign policy issues that I really think they deserve a lot more credit for doing. So definitely take a look at that. All right, We are gonna get into the details of the Kyle Rittenhouse trial, but we're gonna take a quick break before we do so. So everyone sit tight. In about 4 minutes, we'll be back and we'll show you some highlights from Rittenhouse and his testimony in court today.
I'm old enough that I remember when Captain Crunch put the berries in there.
Yay, crunch berries!
And I was like, ooh, the fake berries.
Remember?
We're gonna try that.
We did a story back in the day about how a woman sued, I don't know, General Mills.
She'd been eating it for 4 years,
Right.
believing that it was actual berries.
Yeah. She's like, these aren't real berries at all.
Yeah.
I'm like, I got news for you. Captain Crunch isn't really a captain or a person. Joining me now, legendary whistleblower and American hero, Edward Snowden. First question is, hey, where are you?
I'm in my apartment in Moscow.
All of a sudden, in the studio, Jim Gaffigan, everybody.
Mental illness is, completely undiagnosed in our society.
It's not about a particular administration. It's about a broken system of power, and through that, really the instrumentalization of a system of not justice, but injustice.
People understand whether they claim to deny climate change or not. Our collective house is in crisis. We're also dealing with the legacy of 40 years of economic policies that have made people's lives more precarious.
Sometimes you got to force people into their humanity. Sometimes you have to shake people into empathy.
Senator Elizabeth Warren joins us in the studio.
Healthcare is a basic human right, and we are fighting for basic human rights.
In order to actually achieve that vision of everyone having access to the same resources and getting to determine the outcome of their life, we have a lot of work to do, and it needs to start right now.
Here's something you may not know. When you deposit your money in a big bank, it doesn't just sit, safe and secure, in a vault. Instead, your money could end up building oil pipelines, mining for coal, or drilling in the Arctic. So if you're concerned about the planet, give your money something good to do. Make the move to green with Aspiration's fossil fuel-free account and join the thousands each week who are switching to save their dollars and save the planet at the same time.
Welcome to the Damage Report. I'm John Idarola. This is gonna be a big one.
What Donald Trump has done as president has cut taxes for the wealthy and made life better for rich people. But he's made life worse for poor people.
We're making America great again by throwing more money at the military to destroy other countries because that makes us great instead of investing it in ourselves.
That it's Donald Trump and it's Stephen Miller. The choosing is based on wanting to create cruel and inhumane conditions to scare other people away from ever coming to the United States.
The opportunity to make money off of tragedy is the American way.
There's only one place to put garbage people: in the trash.
We've never had so much access to so much information with so little idea of what the hell is going on.
What does enforcing our borders have to do with traumatizing children? Absolutely nothing.
I think a sane person could say the current situation we have right now is radical. But what we're doing is literally making the world more like hell. That's a warning sign.
ShopTYT.com now has books. One of them is Ryan Grimm's book, We've Got People. That's a saying that AOC said, they've got money, we've got people. It's the best tracing of the AOC victory I have seen anywhere. It's the most accurate, and it's got great details. The book actually goes all the way back to Jesse Jackson and how he was the original Bernie Sanders. If you want to know how we're going to win going forward, those lessons are super important, and they're in Ryan's book. So check it out right now at ShopTYT.com.
We found the perfect person to lead the army, Allison Hartson.
The establishment media works hand in glove with our corporate legislators, and our corporate legislators work hand in glove with the corporation. And we're going to make it so that it's a decentralized force throughout the country so that we can quickly identify stories, quickly identify troll farms, and go in and neutralize the enemy, and then start building responsible media throughout the country and on every platform available.
Welcome back to TYT. Anna Kasparian with you. Thank you for watching. Hopefully you guys have liked and shared the stream, and I'll give you a minute to do that. All right, we got it. And now let's get to our next story because we've got some updates on Kyle Rittenhouse.
Deep breath, Kyle.
That's what
Kyle Rittenhouse Rittenhouse testified in the homicide trial against him, something that was unexpected considering usually those who stand trial do not take the stand unless the defense believes that it will help their case. Now, here it's clear that the defense thought that Kyle Rittenhouse taking the stand will help his case. And before we get to the moment that you just saw in more context, there were many notable moments from the trial today that I wanted to share with all of you, including this moment in regard to the weapon that Kyle Rittenhouse had, the weapon that he used to shoot individuals, 2 of whom died, 1 of whom was wounded. Now, under cross-examination, Rittenhouse did acknowledge that it was illegal for him to carry an AR-15 rifle that was used in the shootings. So for me, the only thing that's an open and closed or open and shut case is the charge regarding his illegal weapon. He has already admitted on the stand that he was in possession of one. That charge, by the way, is a misdemeanor. So it's not nearly as serious as the other charges that he's facing. But nonetheless, I wanted to give you guys some context and details into that moment. So Thomas Binger, the prosecutor, questioned Rittenhouse at length about the AR-15 he used in the shootings, despite being too young to legally own one. Remember, Rittenhouse was only 17 at the time. Rittenhouse confirmed that his friend, Dominic Black, purchased the gun on his behalf because he was a minor. And then he gave another reason why he chose that particular gun instead of, let's say, a handgun. So let's watch that moment in court.
Is the only reason was because you felt you couldn't lawfully possess a pistol?
Correct.
You didn't pick out the AR-15 for any other reason?
I thought it looked cool, but no.
You didn't pick it out because you wanted to go hunting with it, did you?
No.
You didn't pick it out because you were going to use it to protect your house, correct?
Correct.
You picked it out because it looked cool.
I thought it looked cool.
Well, he's being honest there. He thought it looked cool. And that just kind of goes to show you how incredibly successful NRA campaigning has been in this country for decades. I mean, these are not seen as weapons that are dangerous, weapons of death. They're seen as weapons that are cool. So listen, that was a relatively small moment in court. I think that his admission of possessing an illegal weapon is important, but there were other moments that are worth discussing. So there was a moment in the trial, actually multiple moments in the trial, where the judge and the prosecutor were really not getting along. The judge engaged in this shouting match. To give you some more details and context before we go to video of that moment, tensions boiled over in the courtroom when the judge, Schroeder, lashed out at Binger, the prosecutor, for appearing to reference a cell phone video that was ruled inadmissible during a pretrial hearing. The video purportedly showed Rittenhouse saying he wished he had a gun so he could shoot people he believed were shoplifting at a CVS 2 weeks before the events in Kenosha. So again, that video, that evidence that the prosecutors wanted to use was not allowed in court because the judge felt that it didn't have anything to do with the case. The prosecutor argues, well, it kind of gives you a sense of the frame of mind that Kyle Rittenhouse had, but the judge wasn't buying it. You'll hear more of that exchange in just a second. But again, Binger argued that the video could be used to impeach Mr. Rittenhouse and illustrate his state of mind when he killed 2 men on August 25th. Now, here is the moment that I'm referring to. Here's the video from the court.
Just hours ago, I said I had heard nothing in this trial to change any of my rulings. So why?
Testimony, Your Honor.
Pardon me?
That was before the testimony.
Don't get brazen with me. You knew very well. You know very well that an attorney can't go into these types of areas when the judge has already ruled without asking outside the presence of the jury to do so. So don't give me that. That's number one. Number two, this is propensity evidence. I said at the time that I made my ruling, and I'll repeat again now for you, I see no similarity between talking about wishing you had your AR gun, which you don't have, so that you could fire rounds at these thought to be shoplifters. And the incidents in these cases, which are not, there's nothing in your case that suggests the defendant was lying in wait to shoot at somebody.
Now, the judge is correct in stating that the prosecutor can't just willy-nilly bring up evidence that was ruled inadmissible in court, right? So the prosecutor, in my opinion, has made many mistakes and has kind of bungled his case. And this is a good example of that, right? If you want to make the case that the evidence should be used, you have to go through a process to make that happen. You can't just unilaterally decide that you're going to bring it up in the trial after the judge has already ruled that it's inadmissible. Now, with that said, the question of whether or not the judge made the right decision there, I think, is up for debate. Because I would argue that that video is relevant to the case, right? What was his intention in wanting to obtain that weapon illegally, right? What was he intending on doing with it? So the judge has decided, no, I'm not allowing that evidence in court. It is what it is. But there were other moments with the judge that were tense, to say the least. He yelled at the prosecutor quite a bit. In fact, here's another example of that.
I was astonished when you began your examination by commenting on the defendant's post-arrest silence. That's basic law. It's been basic law in this country for 40 years, 50 years. I have no idea why you would do something like that. And it gives, well, I'll leave it at that. So I don't know what you're up to.
May I respond?
Yes.
We filed an other acts motion on this exact issue because in my mind, and I argued this, it is identical to what was going on the night of August 25th, in the sense that the defendant was using this exact same weapon. He was using it in a manner to try and protect property.
No, he wasn't.
Your Honor, with all due respect,
I'm not going to rehash the motion. That's absolutely untrue.
I mean, the video, if the video contains what the prosecutor claims it contains, which is Rittenhouse saying that, he can't wait to shoot individuals that are shoplifting at CBS, then the judge saying that it's untrue makes no sense, right? So the judge has had so many moments in this case that bring into question his own biases, right? And honestly, the judge really doesn't need to do much if he's on the side of Rittenhouse already, because the prosecution has done an awful job in making its case. So I don't know, if I were the judge, I would maybe be a little more careful with how I respond to the prosecutor, with how I handle this trial, because we're all seeing the evidence. We're all seeing everything play out, right? The evidence, in my opinion, is so overwhelmingly in support of the self-defense argument that Kyle Rittenhouse is making that we really don't need the judge to chime in the way he's been chiming in lately. But nonetheless, he can't help himself. In fact, there were other notable moments. I want to go to B7. This is where the judge even swoops in to kind of like bail Kyle Rittenhouse out as he's being questioned by the prosecution.
I didn't think I was going to be attacked and ambushed.
But you just said you had it for protection. What were you expecting you would need protection from?
I thought we had covered much of this before.
I'm specifically focusing in on the time period where he is heading down to the 63rd Street car source. I have not asked him about this yet, Your Honor.
Well, go ahead, but you need to pick up the pace somewhat.
I mean, we already went over this. And then the prosecutor responds with, no, I'm trying to get to this issue, this part of the night. All right, well, speed it up then. Like, the judge is kind of in a disaster, okay? Again, let me just be clear. The video evidence provided is pretty damning. And not damning toward Kyle Rittenhouse. What I'm specifically referring to is there's enough there, in my opinion, that Kyle Rittenhouse can reasonably believe that his life was in danger and that he used his weapon in self-defense. That's the argument that I'm trying to make. The judge is needlessly chiming in a way that's making people question his own impartiality. And he doesn't need to do that. Like, I don't know what he's doing, to be honest. But there was one other moment, people are making a big deal about it because of what you can hear. But the judge's phone goes off, and the ringtone is what people are calling into question. The ringtone is "God Bless the USA," which was played at, I believe, nearly every Donald Trump rally. Now, there's a lot of speculation. He might just like that ringtone. It might not have anything to do with Donald Trump. Even if he is a Trump supporter, I don't think it's necessarily that big of a deal. But nonetheless, the judge's phone going off in the first place, pretty ridiculous and unprofessional. Here's that moment.
And if the court makes a finding that the actions that I had talked about were done in bad faith, then I think both elements.
Can we just agree that the judge is not great? Not great. All right, so we're done with the judge. Now the moment that you've all been waiting for, I'm sure. So Kyle Rittenhouse did take the stand, and at one moment he was explaining what he was experiencing from his perspective when Rosenbaum, the first person he shot, was chasing after him. This is Joseph Rosenbaum who was chasing after him. I want to give you some details, some context before we get to this video. So as defense lawyer Mark Richards was directing him to describe the moments immediately before he opened fire on Rosenbaum, Rittenhouse began sobbing uncontrollably, prompting Kenosha County Circuit Judge Bruce Schroeder to call for a recess. So here you go, here's that emotional moment.
I was cornered from in front of me with Mr. Zeminski, and there were three people right there.
Take a deep breath, Kyle.
That's what I run.
We're gonna just take time for our break anyway. You can just relax for a minute, sir. We're gonna take a break about 10 minutes.
So of course, he's being accused of really acting up in a way that speaks to the emotional, like pulls on the emotional, elements of the jury. And I get that, right? To me, his crying, I don't care if he's sobbing for real or if he's making it up. I don't care about any of that, right? The acting, not acting, it's really irrelevant. Will it have an impact on the jury? Maybe, right? But what matters is what we see on camera. And for me, again, homicide, the homicide charge that he's facing, the burden of proof is very high, right? So you have to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that he fired his weapon with the intent, right? With this intent of murdering people. And he's arguing, no, my life was in danger. I was faced with an imminent threat, both with Rosenbaum and also with Huber and Grosskreutz. Okay, those were that was when he was on his back. And you have his head being kicked in. You also have someone hitting him with the skateboard. Those videos, I think, show that he reasonably believed he was under threat, that he was facing an imminent risk or imminent threat, and as a result, fired his weapon. Now, whether or not you think he should have been there, that's not something that he's on trial for. So we have to separate those two, right? What is he facing criminally? And then what's public opinion in regard to him being there? You guys know how I feel about him being there. He shouldn't have been there. And conservatives will cry and cry about me saying it. But to be quite honest with you, if the tables were turned And we were talking about, I don't know, liberal activists showing up to a conservative protest and doing the exact same thing that Rittenhouse did. If a 17-year-old did the exact same thing that Rittenhouse did, I would make the same argument. What are you doing? You're underage, go home. I get that you supposedly want to protect the community, fine, but that is not your job. We are not supposed to allow vigilantes to enforce the law. That is not the society that we live in. And to be honest with you, look, there were moments where the camera pans to his mother is sobbing uncontrollably. Why would you allow your 17-year-old son to be there with that weapon? No, it's inexcusable. I'm sorry, right? But that's my opinion. He's not on trial for that. There's no law against Kyle Rittenhouse being in Kenosha, Wisconsin. But I'm allowed to have my opinion. And to be quite honest with you, if I had a child, if I had a 17-year-old, I'd tell him to sit his ass down. You're not going anywhere. It's dangerous. And I'd be concerned that my child would get hurt. Or if my child is armed, that he or she would fire that weapon and kill other individuals. Just think about it ahead of time. And what I find really fascinating about this, both in the case of Kyle Rittenhouse and other members of the militia groups that were there, they didn't trust the police to do their jobs. Kyle Rittenhouse loves cops. He does. I mean, there were social media posts where it shows he wants to be a cop, he respects cops, he loves cops. Great. Why didn't he trust cops to do their jobs in protecting the community from looters, protecting the community from people setting fires? It was not his job or the job of any other civilian to carry out justice or to enforce the law that day. And the nature of them being there, unfortunately, allowed that protest to devolve into a situation where people were shot and killed. So those are my thoughts. But in terms of him standing trial, in terms of the charges he's facing, the only charge that I really see him being convicted of, because he admitted it himself on the stand, was being in possession of a weapon that he could not legally be in possession of. All right, that took a lot longer than I expected. And everyone's mad at me for how I've covered this story. Conservatives are mad at me because I corrected myself when I was wrong earlier. Sorry, I'm happy I corrected myself. It's the right thing to do. And some people on the left think that I'm being too generous to Rittenhouse. The evidence is the evidence, guys. I can't change the facts of the story. So do with that what you will. But for now, we got to take a quick break. We'll be right back.
Our audience has given us everything, so we couldn't be more connected. When we first started, people would start giving us directions and say, okay, the mics are too large, move them. Turn them into lav mics. I mean, they were incredible. And then one guy walked in and gave us a really expensive switcher and said, you guys need this, and walked out. Okay, it's amazing. They helped us build a studio. They did a $2 million funding campaign for us. And so they really are us. We do this show together to the point where some of our hosts are even former listeners. So when we say that the audience is part of TYT, we really mean it.
I think what the audience also appreciates is especially if they're members, they really get an inside look into who we are, our personal lives, what drives and motivates us. It goes beyond just storytelling. I think that what we do is allow our viewers and our listeners into our daily lives, and we give them kind of like this inside look into everything that we're passionate about and why it is that we're doing what we're doing, right? Like the motivation behind what we're doing, I think is important for our audience to know, and we're not shy about sharing that with them. And it's different from what people typically see in legacy media outlets where everything is kind of dry and robotic and there's really no personality or authenticity that comes along with it. Oftentimes when we're doing the show, I don't really think of it as me telling them stories. I think of it as us having a mutual respect and conversation with one another. And as I said earlier, I mean, not only do I feel that through the work I do, I'm informing our audience, but they inform me oftentimes as well. You know, they'll pitch stories to us. They'll tell us, you know, a certain perspective or angle to a story that we might have missed. And I love it.
At TYT, our vision is to be the leading global brand in news and talk by serving the audience with authentic commentary and analysis, and to become the digital campfire for the world. And we plan to accomplish that by serving the audience with uniquely authentic commentary and analysis. Put another way, we seek to make TYT into the digital campfire for the world. Today, the traditional mainstream media, along with the government and many of our cherished institutions, have unfortunately been captured by corporate interests. Audiences increasingly sense that they're not getting the whole story or even the truth from once trusted outlets, whether it's broadcast and cable TV news networks or national newspapers and magazines. Instead, the audience is turning to alternative news sources online. The TYT network preeminent among them. Unlike our competitors in the traditional media, we're not beholden to corporate advertisers, to defense contractors, to Wall Street, or to big pharma. And unlike conservative sites online, we're not bankrolled by billionaires looking to push their right-wing propaganda. We only answer to our audience, and for nearly 2 decades, we've delivered by producing honest, timely, and insightful perspectives on the day's news without fear or favor or concern for whose toes we might step on or which powerful elites we might offend.
Hi, I'm Bartholomew Joseph Kyle. I do audio for the main show, The Young Turks. I also do audio for Post Game. I started in 2006. I met Cenk Uygur at the Iraq for Sale screening that was directed by Robert Greenwald. And watching that, I want to figure out a way to be part of something that's genuine and authentic.
Welcome back to TYT. Let's get right to our next story. So, our favorite CNN host, Wolf Blitzer, caught a little heat today because he put out a misleading photo in regard to the pretty high gas prices. We're all experiencing it, unless we're one of the lucky few in the country that get to enjoy public transportation that actually functions decently. But for most people who need to rely on long commutes, gas prices have been killing us. And Wolf Blitzer put out this tweet. FYI, breaking news. I'm just kidding, he didn't say breaking news. FYI, gas prices today here in Washington, DC. And then he has a photo of the gas prices with regular gas at $4.29. And then you get to Supreme at $4.79. Now, he got a lot of backlash because the price of gas per gallon varies depending on the state you're in, depending on the city you're in. So if you happen to be in an area where there's high demand for gas, places that are densely populated, metropolitan areas, places like DC, for instance, it is likely that you're gonna end up paying a lot more for gas. There are other issues at play. If you're living in a state like California, there are additional taxes associated with each gallon of gas. So that's something to consider as well. So look, people were giving him a hard time about it, but considering all of the foibles we've seen from Wolf Blitzer and cable news hosts like him, I would say this is a mild offense. But I do think it's worth discussing what we're experiencing at the pump. Why are gas prices so high? Why are we experiencing inflation? You'll see them talk about it and fearmonger about it in corporate press, but they never explain the forces at play. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit. So it's important to understand that the basics of supply and demand obviously play a role in gas prices, right? So if the supply of oil is low, if the production of oil is low and the demand is high, which it has been lately as a result of things opening back up, people traveling more after the COVID pandemic and all that. I mean, we're still experiencing the pandemic, but you get what I mean. Things are opening up. Demand is up, but supply is low. Why is supply low? Well, remember during the pandemic in the early months, people just weren't really leaving their homes, they weren't traveling. And so there was an abundance of oil abundance of gasoline available for people to, fuel their vehicles, airlines to fuel their planes and all of that. But there was incredibly low demand. And so the countries that produce the oil were hurt by that, especially if that's their number one export. And so then all of a sudden demand goes up. But here's the interesting part. So there are these countries that make up an organization known as OPEC, OPEC Plus as it's called today. And these are oil producing countries, right? And basically what they do is they work together as a cartel to determine how much oil they produce. And the reason why they do that is because they want to manipulate the market. And we're kind of seeing that right now. It's playing out right now. So just to give you some more context, if OPEC plus countries are unsatisfied with the price of oil, it is in their interest to cut the supply of oil so prices rise. A pledge by OPEC plus to cut supply causes an immediate spike in the price of oil. Over time, the price reverts back to a level usually lower when supply is not meaningfully cut or demand adjusts. Those are the basics, okay? Those are the basics. If you guys can remember in the very beginning of the pandemic, when demand for oil was at record lows, the Trump administration actually decided to purchase oil specifically to artificially inflate the value of it. And then the Trump administration decided to keep that oil in the US reserves, okay? So we have reserves of oil that the Trump administration had decided to purchase. And again, that is a part of this manipulation that I'm referring to here, right? We talk about free market. And is it really free market when you have all of these various factors at play that specifically intend to manipulate the actual value or the price of oil? It's not really a free market. I mean, come on. And I'm not saying that as in, oh, there's all this regulation in place to protect the consumer. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that the manipulation is meant to specifically benefit the oil producers or the OPEC countries, or the countries included in OPEC. And that includes Azerbaijan, Bahrain, Kazakhstan, Malaysia, Mexico, Russia, Sudan, South Sudan. A lot of countries that produce oil are part of OPEC plus. Now, recently, OPEC plus countries had a conference. And one of the topics at hand was this pressure from the Biden administration to produce more oil to provide more supply to meet the demand, right? That way oil prices, or I should say gas prices at the pump are lowered. And he got kind of a negative reaction from these oil producing countries. So here is a quick video explaining a little bit of that and the manipulation that takes place.
The biggest takeaway from the press conference, as Prince Abdulaziz said, really nobody gets to tell OPEC plus what to do. The united front showed at that press conference. He rallied every minister, OPEC and OPEC plus ministers from, of course, Russia, UAE, but Azerbaijan, Nigeria, everybody was there saying, look, this was a collective decision. We are doing what we think is right for the market. Nobody gets to tell us what to do, even if that person sits in the White House.
Right, so they're gonna do what's best for the market. And for them, they wanna make up the money lost during the beginning of the pandemic when demand for oil was at record lows. This is what they're doing to ensure that they make up those lost profits. Again, it's a manipulative tactic. There's no question about it. They've agreed to increase oil production a little bit to help with prices a little bit. But guys, I also want you to take a step back and think about what that means. Is that what we want? Right? I mean, people are suffering, people are struggling with the prices. There's no question about it. But the United States should have been front and center in regard to investing in renewable energy and getting us off of this fossil fuel addiction, right? We're so reliant on oil, even at this late date. And we didn't need to be here. We didn't need to find ourselves in this position, but we do. So look, in a perfect world, we wouldn't be dependent on oil, but we are. And so now we're stuck in this insanely annoying cycle where all these countries that produce oil, all these countries that have a profit motive are very obviously, transparently, overtly manipulating the market. And that's translating to these high gas prices at the pump. That's what's taking place. Everyone wants to blame things on Biden. I love blaming Biden when Biden is responsible for doing the wrong thing. But this isn't really an issue pertaining specifically to the White House. This is a problem that we've had for a long time with OPEC making decisions, not based on what's best for people, but what's based or what's best for the profit motive that these oil producing countries have, UAE, Saudi Arabia, what have you. So that's what's really taking place. All right, I wanna move on to our next story because this really infuriated me. As much as I hate talking about the manufactured culture war issue of critical race theory, we do need to dive into this. So, Meghan McCain asked a simple question about critical race theory, and I thought maybe we'd answer. Let's watch.
I just thought it was very strange that there's a complete and utter denial that critical race theory exists and is being taught. There's ample evidence of it being taught in many states across the country. And if it's something that doesn't exist, why are Democrats so riled up at the idea of it being banned places?
Well, even though critical race theory, a graduate level curriculum, is not being taught in high schools or elementary schools, the reason why Democrats are riled up, and I think everyone should be riled up, is because critical race theory has been used as a catch-all phrase for US history. Anything that might hurt the feelings of conservative parents is now up for debate in the curriculum of students throughout K through 12. And that is insane. Critical race theory is something very specific, but it's now just being used to refer to anything taught in schools that hurt the precious feelings of conservatives. And there is an orchestrated effort to oust educators, teachers, school board members, anyone that conservatives dislike. And we actually saw that play out in one school district in Texas. And I wanted to talk about that because this is now exploded into something more than just a manufactured culture war, right? And I just want to note that conservatives always find a way to repackage the same garbage in every administration, because talking about manufactured issues is far better than allowing the American electorate to focus on the fact that the Republican Party has failed to provide any policy solutions for the very real economic anxiety that Americans are facing across the board, regardless of their political identity. Doesn't matter if you're a Democrat, doesn't matter if you're a Republican. All we've seen from the Republican Party, from GOP lawmakers, is this concerted effort to defeat any attempt to better Americans' lives. They don't want you to focus on that. So instead, they find a scapegoat, they find some other boogeyman. And in this case, it's critical race theory. Again, a graduate level curriculum. I mean, Ben Shapiro said it during my debate with him. He's like, I learned critical race theory when I was in law school. So you're telling me that fourth graders are learning what you were learning in law school? Really? We all know it's BS. It's just being used as a phrase or a word or a curriculum that somehow has been expanded to include everything in American history that conservative parents don't want their kids to learn about. Which, by the way, you don't want your kids to learn about this country's history, homeschool them. Why do all these other students have to suffer as a result of your feelings getting hurt? I just don't understand it. But anyway, moving on, I want to talk about what happened in Texas. So the Grapevine Colleyville Independent School District Board of Trustees voted this week on Monday to part ways with a principal His name is James Whitfield. He's a Black principal, by the way, who was suspended this year at the Colleyville Heritage High School in the Fort Worth area. The school board had voted in September not to renew his contract. Now, why? Well, parents accused him of pushing critical race theory, or CRT. But of course, there's no evidence that Colleyville Heritage High School or Whitfield taught critical race theory. Now, the trustees voted unanimously to vote against, they voted against renewing his contract. And when they got a little bit of heat, once this became a national headline, they started making up all these excuses. Like, no, it has nothing to do with critical race theory. No, we're just gonna make vague accusations of insubordination. We're gonna make some vague accusations of him deleting some emails that he shouldn't have deleted. We're gonna make some vague accusations of him refusing to comply with an investigation. What investigation? Give us some details. Now, I should also note that Whitfield was contacted by members of the group, right? The board of trustees, who wanted him to take down photos that he had posted of him and his wife on social media. He's Black, his wife is white. And he was like, I gotta take down pictures of me and my wife, why? Oh, those pictures are kind of inappropriate considering you're a principal. Why are they inappropriate? No, this had to do with the accusation that he's teaching or allowing the critical race theory to be part of the curriculum in the high school that he was the principal of. Now, here's what the reality is with critical race theory for the Meghan McCains of the world who are just like so confused. I don't understand why it's a problem. Like if it doesn't exist, why is it a problem? Okay, well, here's why. Conservative organizations or organizers and parents have seized on the phrase, turning it into shorthand for a suite of lessons or programs that they say are un-American. By the way, that's totally subjective. Something that might be considered un-American to one parent might be very different for another parent. But nonetheless, let me continue. No, let me also note, as parents, you might be an expert in something else. But how about allow the educators who went through schooling and training and went through the process of getting credentialed to make the decisions about the curriculum? In this era that we're living in, where everyone thinks they're an expert on everything, is nonsense. If you're a parent and you're not an educator, you don't get to be the arbiter of what every student learns in the school that your child is going to. You do get to make a decision of pulling your child out of the school if you're so uncomfortable that you don't want your child to learn the reality of US history. But subjecting all these other students to subpar education because your fifis get hurt is ridiculous. Let me go back to this graphic. Maybe I can get through it this time. Conservative organizers and parents have seized on the phrase, turning it into shorthand for a suite of lessons or programs that they say are un-American, and that could make white students feel collective guilt, or Black students see themselves as helpless victims. Texas, by the way, is one of 8 states with broad new laws banning the teaching of critical race theory, a decades-old graduate-level study that examines the relationship between the law and racial inequality. Let me state that again. A decades-old graduate level study. Decades-old graduate level study. But conservatives see that and they're like, no, this is a Pokemon game, gotta catch them all. Anything we dislike is critical race theory. It's just so sad and pathetic, and a principal has lost his job as a result of this manufactured culture war. Absolutely manufactured nonsense that's funded by right-wingers, that's funded by Koch-backed organizations. I mean, you have people showing up to school board meetings whining about critical race theory when they don't even have kids, when they don't even have kids going to a school in that district. Just boggles the mind. Now, I want to go to this video of Whitfield because he was speaking to MSNBC about what he's experiencing. And I think that he shed some more light on the whole situation. Let's watch.
It has been shocking, the events that have happened since July 26th school board meeting, where you had people calling essentially for my job. You know, you had people, you mentioned this seems like somewhere far back in time, but here we are in 2021. You had people in the gallery yelling, fire him. And that behavior was tolerated and allowed. And here's the thing. People they've got this CRT boogeyman that they've created. And essentially, the people talking about this have no idea what it's about. And CRT is not even our debate. What they really are against is essentially who I am as an educator. I'm about creating environments that are responsive and inclusive for all students, no matter their race, religion, sexual orientation, you name it. Every student that walks through that door, they are my babies and I love them.
That man is a casualty of the right wing's manufactured culture war meant to distract you, meant to distract their supporters from the reality that our lawmakers are failures. Our lawmakers do not serve us. Conservative lawmakers certainly do not serve their own constituents. Can't say great things about Democrats either, to be honest with you. But what we're seeing is just this attempt to point to a squirrel, any manufactured culture war to distract from their failures. That is what's happening. I mean, we're not talking about what happened in Texas with their privatized, deregulated energy grid, which led to 230 Texans dying during a winter storm. We're not talking about that anymore. We're not talking about corporate rule in this country. We're talking about a made up boogeyman in grade school. Because guess what? Whether we want to believe it or not, the right wing knows how to pick a message, even if it's a repackaged culture war message that they've used for decades and decades, and get everyone to talk about that. What do the Democrats have? What are the Democrats doing? Perfect example is how Terry McAuliffe just completely failed to respond to the critical race theory issue in the state of Virginia. His response was, I'm paraphrasing, but essentially, no, parents shouldn't get to decide what their children are learning. Now, I actually agree with that, okay? The parents are not experts, they're not educators. They need to sit down or take their kids out of school if they're so uncomfortable with what their kids are learning. But that's not the right message when you're running for elected office, when you're running for re-election. A far better message would be, this is made up nonsense, and it's meant to distract you from the fact that my political opponent has nothing to offer you in terms of economic policy or anything substantive to better your life. Here's what I want to do. Dismiss it, mock it, have a better message in response. But Democrats don't have that. That's why they lose, that's why they fail. And part of the problem is when you have two parties that are beholden to corporate interests, kind of hard for Democrats to put out a message they're looking out for you, that they have something better to offer. When you see them fail on a national level in passing policies that Americans overwhelmingly want, kind of hard to put out a message that you're gonna offer the electorate something better. Anyway, we got to get to our second hour, so we're going to take a brief break, but have no fear. Wosny Lambre will be joining me to talk about a whole host of other issues, including Eric Bolling, like just losing his mind over Sesame Street. We'll be right back.
I'm old enough that I remember when Captain Crunch put the berries in it.
Yay, crunch berries!
And I was like, ooh, the fake berries.
Remember?
We're gonna try that.
We did a story back in the day about how a woman sued, I don't know, General Mills.
She'd been eating it for 4 years, believing that it was actual berries. Yeah, she's like, these aren't real berries at all. Yeah. I'm like, I got news for you, Captain Crunch isn't really a captain or a person. Joining me now, legendary whistleblower and American hero, Edward Snowden. First question is, hey, where are you?
I'm in my apartment in Moscow.
All of a sudden, in the studio, Jim Gaffigan, everybody.
Mental illness is, completely undiagnosed in our society.
It's not about a particular administration. It's about a broken system of power, and through that, really the instrumentalization of a system of not justice, but injustice.
People understand whether they claim to deny climate change or not. Our collective house is in crisis. We're also dealing with the legacy of 40 years of economic policies that have made people's lives more precarious.
Sometimes you got to force people into their humanity. Sometimes you have to shake people into empathy.
Senator Elizabeth Warren joins us in the studio.
Healthcare is a basic human right, and we are fighting for basic human rights.
In order to actually achieve that vision of everyone having access to the same resources and getting to determine the outcome of their life, we have a lot of work to do, and it needs to start right now.
Here's something you may not know. When you deposit your money in a big bank, it doesn't just sit, safe and secure, in a vault. Instead, your money could end up building oil pipelines, mining for coal, or drilling in the Arctic. So if you're concerned about the planet, give your money something good to do. Make the move to green with Aspiration's fossil fuel-free account and join the thousands each week who are switching to save their dollars and save the planet at the same time.
Welcome to the Damage Report. I'm John Idarola. This is gonna be a big one.
What Donald Trump has done as president has cut taxes for the wealthy and made life better for rich people. But he's made life worse for poor people.
We're making America great again by throwing more money at the military to destroy other countries because that makes us great instead of investing it in ourselves.
That it's Donald Trump and it's Stephen Miller. The choosing is based on wanting to create cruel and inhumane conditions to scare other people away from ever coming to the United States.
The opportunity to make money off of tragedy is the American way.
There is only one place to put garbage people: in the trash.
We've never had so much access to so much information with so little idea of what the hell is going on.
What does enforcing our borders have to do with traumatizing children? Absolutely nothing.
I think a sane person could say the current situation we have right now is radical. But what we're doing is literally making the world more like hell. That's a warning sign.
ShopTYT.com now has books. One of them is Ryan Grimm's book, We've Got People. That's a saying that AOC said, they've got money, we've got people. It's the best tracing of the AOC victory I have seen anywhere. It's the most accurate, and it's got great details. The book actually goes all the way back to Jesse Jackson and how he's the original Bernie Sanders. If you want to know how we're going to win going forward, those lessons are super important, and they're in Ryan's book. So check it out right now at ShopTYT.com.
We found the perfect person to lead the army, Allison Hartson.
The establishment media works hand in glove with our corporate legislators, and our corporate legislators work hand in glove with the corporation. And we're going to make it so that it's a decentralized force throughout the country so that we can quickly identify stories, quickly identify troll farms, and go in and neutralize the enemy, and then start building responsible media throughout the country and on every platform available.
Welcome back, everyone. Anna Kasparian and Waz. I love it when you introduce yourself with your French accent. So have at it.
You want me to say, what's ni l'ombre?
I love it. I love it. It always makes my day when you say that. So there you have it, folks. Waz joins me for hour 2, and we've got a lot to get to. But I have to say, it's been a while since we've done the show together, and I'm really looking forward to it. Unsurprisingly, and this was totally by accident. I didn't pitch this story in our production meeting today. In the bonus episode, there is a sex-related story, which I feel like for some reason, these topics always come up when Waz is on the show. And it's, I swear to you, always a coincidence, but it's a fun story. You guys will love it, okay?
That's God, whatever God is, that's God.
Exactly. That's God, exactly. All right, well, before we get to those salacious stories in our bonus episode, become a member, tyt.com/join. I have a pretty serious yet fascinating story to share in regard to smuggling plastics. Apparently, there's plastic smuggling taking place, and California is the biggest offender. So let me give you the details. There's a new report by the independent Swiss research group Global Initiative Against Transnational Organized Crime. And what they found was that Americans not only love using plastic and being incredibly wasteful, they're also smuggling plastics to poorer countries for disposal. So the Los Angeles Times wrote about this, and it's really fascinating to see how this is taking place, right? Because there are supposed to be some international regulations against this, but smugglers are finding a way. So building on a previous investigation by Interpol, the new report maps the web of brokers, middlemen, legitimate recycling companies, and organized crime groups that move millions of tons of discarded plastic from the United States, Europe, and Australia to countries in Southeast Asia and Africa. So there are two things happening. First of all, of course, you need the wasteful countries trying to export their junk, their plastic. So that's part number one. But then you also need some countries that are willing to accept it, right? And in that regard, there are countries that tend to make a little bit of money by accepting the plastics. But in some cases, there's all sorts of tricky stuff taking place where as the plastics are being exported to poorer countries, the country accepting the shipment doesn't even realize until it's too late that they accepted plastic waste, okay? So I'll explain to you how that takes place. The report found that legitimate recycling companies and waste brokers have engaged in fraud, concealing shipments of banned plastic products, among other goods, illegally dumping them, and paying bribes to get past inspectors. Exporters have also mislabeled their cargo so that the plastic scrap incorrectly appears to be in compliance with international agreements. And I'll get to those international agreements in just a second, disguising it from customs officers, right? So the labeling is an issue here, obviously being incredibly deceptive in what's being exported. But there's also other tricky stuff taking place in regard to the routes being used during the exporting process. So even the shipping routes used to move plastic waste around the world are often designed to incorporate multiple stops in different countries so that by the time an illegal shipment arrives at its final destination, it's not even clear where it came from. This makes it difficult for regulators in Indonesia, Malaysia, and the Philippines, countries that are making an effort to send back banned plastic scrap, to return them to their origins. And final point before I go to you, Waz, if you look at the United States, of course, the US is an offender. But it turns out that California is the biggest offender. California is especially culpable, writes the Los Angeles Times. Plastic scrap generated in the state accounted for nearly, get this, a third of all US exports to developing countries this year, and is the main source of banned plastic exports to Malaysia. And the reason why is because of the fact that you have the Port of Los Angeles. It's the main US entry point for goods both to and from Asia. And once those shipping containers are empty, they can be refilled with Californians' plastic scrap and sent back across the Pacific Ocean at relatively little cost. So junk. We are producing junk, we are exporting junk, and we're expecting poor countries to shoulder the burden. Waz.
This reminds me of two things. The New York Times put out a video the other day where they said that blue states are actually exacerbating the crises of our times at an accelerated rate, right? When it comes to housing crisis, the sort of wage gap between the highest earners and the lowest, homelessness, like you name it. It's places like California, like Washington State, where the Dems are in the executive. They basically run those state governments. They make all the freaking rules, yet they produce horrible outcomes. And therefore, it's hypocritical when they go with this blue no matter who. And California basically being the capital of tree hugging in America, being the state that is the worst offender of this is the other thing that comes to mind, is just like, wow. And also the country that this waste is going to, I think, man, another thing that it reminds me of as it pertains to the climate crisis is that rich countries know that the countries that are gonna be most afflicted by it first are the third world, are poor countries. And they're basically like, we'll kick the can and figure out how to keep them damn migrants out later. Like, it's not gonna really come to kill us first. And so we don't really have to care or treat it like a crisis. And so, that's just a long way of saying we're doomed.
Right, I mean, look, I don't know if you saw the exchange that Abby Martin had with Nancy Pelosi during this climate summit, but she asked such a great question, which is, hey, look, the Pentagon is one of the top contributors to the climate crisis. And so you have supported increasing the defense budget over and over and over again. Why aren't we discussing the impact that the Defense Department has on the climate issue? And of course, Nancy Pelosi didn't really have much of an answer except to say, well, the Pentagon sees climate change as a national security risk. And it certainly is a national security risk when the climate crisis is going to and is already leading to a migrant crisis. And so it was her way of saying, no, I mean, we need to fund the Defense Department so when the migrants come, we got to find a way to fend them off. I mean, she was pretty transparent about it. It was incredible.
Yeah, again, the crisis is not that the planet is going to be heating up at a ridiculously accelerated rate. The crisis is that these nasty black and brown people, disgusting, Anna. These people will come to our shores and just muck up the works. I already need a shower. I don't know about you, Anna.
Well, we're not done with Nancy Pelosi just yet. When we come back from the break, we'll talk about how she officiated an opulent wedding. And yes, there is a climate angle to that story as well. So stick around, you don't want to miss it. We've got that and more coming up for you.
Our audience has given us everything, so we couldn't be more connected. When we first started, people would start giving us directions and say, okay, the mics are too large, move them. Turn them into lav mics. I mean, they were incredible. And then one guy walked in and gave us a really expensive switcher and said, you guys need this, and walked out. Okay, it's amazing. They helped us build a studio. They did a $2 million funding campaign for us. And so they really are us. We do this show together to the point where some of our hosts are even former listeners. So when we say that the audience is part of TYT, we really mean it.
I think what the audience also appreciates is especially if they're members, they really get an inside look into who we are, our personal lives, what drives and motivates us. It goes beyond just storytelling. I think that what we do is allow our viewers and our listeners into our daily lives, and we give them kind of like this inside look into everything that we're passionate about and why it is that we're doing what we're doing, right? Like the motivation behind what we're doing, I think is important for our audience to know, and we're not shy about sharing that with them. And it's different from what people typically see in legacy media outlets where everything is kind of dry and robotic and there's really no personality or authenticity that comes along with it. Oftentimes when we're doing the show, I don't really think of it as me telling them stories. I think of it as us having a mutual respect and conversation with one another. And as I said earlier, I mean, not only do I feel that through the work I do, I'm informing our audience, but they inform me oftentimes as well. They'll pitch stories to us. They'll tell us, a certain perspective or angle to a story that we might have missed. And I love it.
At TYT, our vision is to be the leading global brand in news and talk by serving the audience with authentic commentary and analysis and to become the digital campfire for the world. And we plan to accomplish that by serving the audience with uniquely authentic commentary and analysis. Put another way, we seek to make TYT into the digital campfire for the world. Today, the traditional mainstream media, along with the government and many of our cherished institutions, have unfortunately been captured by corporate interests. Audiences increasingly sense that they're not getting the whole story or even the truth from once trusted outlets, whether it's broadcast and cable TV news networks or national newspapers and magazines. Instead, the audience is turning to alternative news sources online. The TYT network preeminent among them. Unlike our competitors in the traditional media, we're not beholden to corporate advertisers, to defense contractors, to Wall Street, or to big pharma. And unlike conservative sites online, we're not bankrolled by billionaires looking to push their right-wing propaganda. We only answer to our audience, and for nearly 2 decades, we've delivered by producing honest, timely, and insightful perspectives on the day's news without fear or favor or concern for whose toes we might step on or which powerful elites we might offend.
Hi, I'm Bartholomew Joseph Kyle. I do audio for the main show, The Young Turks. I also do audio for Post Game. I started in 2006. I met Cenk Uygur at the Iraq for Sale screening that was directed by Robert Greenwald. And watching that, I want to figure out a way to be part of something that's genuine and authentic.
Welcome back to TYT, Anna Kasparian and Wozny Lambre. You can check him out on Woznia, a show that he hosts for us on Twitch, twitch.tv/TYT. He's also doing amazing work over at The Ringer. Woz, you wanna do a quick plug?
Yeah, anybody who's interested in the NBA, even at a cursory glance, should check out our work over at theringer.com. Of course, check out the Ringer NBA show, where I do a show called The Group Chat that drops every single Wednesday. And I do a YouTube show called Full Court Fits for our YouTube channel. So check all those things out.
Are you still doing Woke Bros? Because I noticed that Nando did some other show on that network. Which I listened to and I thought was great.
Yeah. Nando is he's doing Succession reviews, but yes, of course we're still doing Woke Bros. We ended up taking off last week, I think it was, for scheduling conflicts or whatever. But yeah, we're doing that. Check that out every single Thursday morning. Go subscribe to Woke Bros.
Love it. All right, well, let's talk about the fancy Dems. Because while they claim to care about climate change, their actions would prove otherwise. So, on the heels of touting the importance of doing something in response to climate change, and this was, of course, during the COP26 summit, ice cream queen Nancy Pelosi was seen cozying up with rich oil tycoons at a fancy San Francisco wedding. In fact, she was a big part of that wedding, an important part of that wedding. Pelosi officiated at the wedding of Ivy Getty, the great-granddaughter of oil tycoon J. Paul Getty, in recent days. Although it remains unclear what day the wedding was held, photographs and details of the wedding suggested it was an opulent affair featuring designer dresses for bridesmaids and decorations with gold lace. Also in attendance, by the way, were other fancy Dems, including Gavin Newsom. The ceremony was held at City Hall in San Francisco, and pictures from Vogue appear to show fellow Democrats Newsom and the former mayor of Chicago, London Breed, in attendance. And so, look, it definitely sends a message that counters what Nancy Pelosi and congressional Democrats claim to care about during the climate summit, COP26. And that doesn't really surprise me. The notion of politicians being hypocrites is not new, to say the least. But they keep finding themselves in these scandals, right? And when right-wingers do it, it's never really turned into a big deal by the Democratic Party because they're so awful at messaging. But when Democrats do it, it just provides so much material for the right wing, which, by the way, I'm not against. If the Democrats are wrong, they're wrong. But here she is officiating the wedding for the daughter of, or the granddaughter, I should say, of like an oil tycoon. And it's just, look at that wedding. Like, look at that wedding. I mean, I'm not hating, sure, whatever. But like, how about after failing so hard on the Build Back Better agenda, maybe don't be seen officiating a wedding like this. I don't know, just thinking out loud.
You know, I know you don't watch a lot of football, Anna, but in the words of the great Denny Green, they are who we thought they were as it pertains to Nancy Pelosi and Gavin Newsom. And honestly, Nancy Pelosi and TYT viewers are savvy enough and smart enough to understand this. She ascended to her position in the Democratic Party by being one of the best fundraisers. And no, she wasn't doing them Bernie fundraising, getting 20, 30 bucks from normal people like you and I. She was going after the big bucks, big donors. And that's why she became a prominent member of the Democratic Party. And amongst those people, I'm sorry, like Nancy Pelosi and Gavin Newsom are model Democrats, right? They're not an embarrassment. They're what a Democrat should be. Suck ups to rich people and pay lip service to the sort of liberalism about cultural issues like the arts and quote unquote representation, et cetera, et cetera. But when it comes down to the nuts and bolts things, bread and butter issues that everyday working Americans care about, they fail to deliver at every single turn. So the idea that Nancy Pelosi is hanging out with a bunch of aristocrats and so is Gavin Newsom, that's par for the course for these people in their ilk.
Yeah, and it doesn't even matter how many times they get burned by doing the exact same thing. They're gonna keep doing it because this is, look, I'll get to why this is a bigger problem in just a minute, but I wanted to just make a clarification because the graphic totally threw me off and I'm like, oh man, I really don't know who the mayor, which mayor serves which city because this graphic is throwing me off. But no, there was a mistake in the graphic. So London Breed is the mayor of San Francisco. And yes, the mayor of Chicago was there as well, in addition to the governor of California, Gavin Newsom. So let me get that clarification out of the way. But putting that aside, look, the problem with the Democratic Party is that the reputation that the party used to have, the party of FDR, like that doesn't exist anymore. And I think voters are now privy to that because you see Democratic lawmakers, of course, taking bribes, legalized bribes from corporate interests. And so you see a lot of similarities substantively between Democrats and Republicans, especially when it comes to economic policy. You hear a lot about fiscal responsibility from Democrats, which is a joke. I mean, that was what you would typically hear from the Republican Party. And so when your best friends and the people that you're like rubbing elbows with are the Gettys and the lobbyists that you're enjoying a meal at the French Laundry with, you're just so disconnected from the realities of your own constituents. And that's why it's a problem. Now, add that to the fact that you also have members of Congress trading individual stocks, investing in individual stocks, which means that if they know that their regulations or proposed regulations are gonna hurt the bottom line for these companies, it's gonna hurt their bottom line. It's gonna hurt their return on investment. So the way the system is set up altogether really puts constituents at a disadvantage. So much so that, what do these Dems gotta lose? I mean, they're brazen about their ties to the corporate world, totally brazen.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the mistakes that get made on our side on the left is that we think the other side, even though, I tend to think we have two opponents on the left, the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. But we make the mistake of thinking that the other side is just a bunch of unhinged, crazed, idiotic, petty, demented, lunatics, deplorable. But guess what? They got a point about making Nancy Pelosi the poster child for Democratic Party hypocrisy. They're right. Like at the end of the day, you have to admit that the right wing has a point when they zero in on people like Pelosi. Like, how can we pretend that woman gives a damn about the issues that afflict working class people when, one, she's a 300 millionaire at least, and two, all she ever does is hobnob and kowtow to the uber wealthy. So when they make her a monster on the right, whether it be on hate radio or Fox News, and talk about the hypocrisy and the lies and the BS about, I just love the black people and the gays and the trans and all the afflicted. they can tell that it's BS, it's lip service.
Totally, exactly. I mean, that's such an important point. And they weigh into those culture issues, those social issues, precisely because they don't really have a leg to stand on in regard to the economic issues. So when the right wing baits them with manufactured culture wars, stuff like critical race theory, for instance, they always take the bait, because what other option do they have? What is their alternative message to the Republican Party? Are they gonna talk about how they're holding corporations accountable? Are they gonna talk about how they're making corporations pay their fair share of taxes? Are they gonna talk about all the wonderful social programs that they've accomplished? They haven't done anything. They haven't done much. I mean, even with the bipartisan infrastructure bill that they're now trying to do positive PR around, sure, there are some provisions. I don't want to completely minimize some of the okay provisions in there. But make no mistake about it, there is a reason why you had Republicans, 19 of whom voted for it in the Senate, 13 of whom voted for it in the House. They voted for it because they love the corporate handouts. And so, by the way, the reconciliation bill, what happened? What happened? Well, where'd it go? No, but don't worry. Some progressives in Congress trust that Joe Biden will deliver. Trust.
And here's the thing, these people want to be able to run on simply, I got a D next to my name. You voter should trust me just because you see that shiny old D next to my name, and it's like, you guys don't do anything. Your brand isn't strong. It's in the tank for a reason. And not only just that, Joe Biden's approval rating, record lows, because the pandemic still stinks. People are sick of the mandates. And on the other end, you're delivering nothing in terms of material goods to these people. So they're cooked. They're just cooked.
Yep, absolutely. Well, let's move over to, unfortunately, Eric Bolling. This weird video rant caught my attention. I thought it was worth talking about. So, Eric Bolling apparently thinks good programming is showing videos of himself from 10 years ago on Fox. And that was what he did in a recent segment where he weighed in on culture war issues. This time, the big baddies are the Muppets. You got Mr. Potato Head, I guess that's played out. You got Dr. Seuss, that's a little boring now. So time to move over to the Muppets. And in his segment, like I said, he decides to play a clip of himself from 10 years ago where he dunked on the Muppets. Let's take a look at that, and I'll give you some more context about what he's trying to get at here.
Not the first time these little felt communists have tried to infect the minds of our youngest and most vulnerable children. A decade ago, way back in 2011, I called out Kermit, that cute little green monster commie. But I remember when I was a little kid, we were poor, we were dead broke, in fact, and my parents would see someone wealthy driving by and be like, see that guy? He started a business, he worked hard, you can be like that someday. Not pointing the finger at Tex rich man and saying he's a bad guy. Well, here's what happened. The Muppets were blaming an oil baron for closing down the studio. That's cute, you little oppressive Muppets. They didn't even try to hide their disdain for success by naming the guy Tex Richman. But I took them to task. I didn't mean to say anything that offended you guys. I called them anti-capitalist because of the movie, and the rich oil guy was portrayed as bad. Just want to say, listen, Froggy, what's his name? Kermit, Miss Piggy, if you want to debate this anytime, I'm all for it. So let's bring it. Let's have maybe, I don't know, Donald Trump moderate a debate. What do you say, Kermit?
Eric Bolling, I'm glad he brought back that clip from 10 years ago to show Americans what a hero he is for taking Kermit the Frog to task in defense of an oil baron. Good for him. The real winners in this country, the people really building America from the ground up, are those fossil fuel companies and the fossil fuel executives. So good on you for defending Tex Richman. What a courageous and brave thing to do, really.
It's amazing. And the funny thing is, like, I can remember, because I was that kind of kid, which should probably surprise nobody. I wasn't into Sesame Street. It was like, if it wasn't Spider-Man or Batman or somebody getting beat up or shot at, I really didn't like those kind of children's shows, right? I thought the lessons learned on Sesame Street as a kid were like kind of trite and rote, and like, even as a kid, I was like, come on, this is pretty freaking sappy. These dudes are so in tune with what the actual messaging needs to be to poor white people, poor straight white people, poor whoever type of white person. Like they understand why they got to keep centering these cultural issues so acutely, because again, then they'll start thinking, who's really to blame for my problems? Of course it's Big Bird, right? Of course it's some random show on Netflix. Obviously, it's not the most successful people in America who hoard all of our wealth and resources. I think this clip is this guy telling on himself, quite frankly.
Of course, and as sappy as you might think Sesame Street is, growing up in an immigrant household that yes, struggled financially. If it weren't for Sesame Street, I would struggle to speak English. I learned English through watching Sesame Street. I remember, I've told this story before, but it's been a long time since I've mentioned it. When I was going into kindergarten, they make you do like an assessment to see where you are with English. And I was not in a good place because I grew up in a household where both my parents spoke Armenian. And so I remember the educator like putting up cards that had letters, and I didn't know what the letters were. And I was so deeply ashamed of it, even though I'm like a little 5-year-old. And I would wake up early every morning just to catch Sesame Street and learn English. So when I actually started kindergarten, if it weren't for Sesame Street, I would have really been behind. So that's my way of saying that you're being very mean, Waz, okay? There is an important role for Sesame Street in American society. How dare you?
Listen. I'm not here to judge Sesame Street, and it does play a role. And again, I can't even be in judgment, because the bottom line is I learned about sex at 13 from American Pie. Okay, the movie American Pie. So can I really be one to judge whose education was better, yours or mine, via popular media? And I think yours was quite better than mine was.
Well, all right, fair enough. I do want to get to one more clip of Bolling's absurd rant. And I think, Waz, all the reasons that you gave for this rant, you just hit the nail on the head. And I think that this next clip reinforces what you just mentioned. So let's watch.
All right, well, I called them out almost 10 years later. They never took me up on that offer. Apparently, though, me calling them out didn't sit well with one portly pink dummy who took to the media to trash me for exposing her leftist tyranny.
It's almost as laughable as accusing Fox News as, being news. Boy, that's going to be all over the internet.
Yeah.
Seriously, they got a real big problem.
Guess what? The invite's still open, Miss Piggy. If you or your emasculated frog boyfriend, Kermit, ever wanted to join this desk, it's free.
It's just so, like, it's embarrassing. But these audiences eat it up, right? And then look, what sparked all of this? Like, it is pretty random to want to go back 10 years and play a clip of yourself. But part of it was the fact that Sesame Street was just trying to like educate kids about the COVID vaccine, so they're not afraid of it and all of that. And of course, conservatives, they love making anything related to COVID a culture war topic. And so that's really what this was centered on. The notion that Sesame Street or the Muppets or any type of children's programming would dare educate kids about something that the country is dealing with right now. But yeah, I mean, Eric Bolling is one of the most over-emotional hacks in conservative media. So much so that sexual misconduct allegations against him led Fox News, of all places, to fire him. And that's saying something when it's Fox News. So Eric Bolling, Maybe you've got other issues to focus on rather than, how much you hate Sesame Street and the Muppets. But as you said, Waz, it's all about the culture wars. It's all about directing the audience's attention on nonsense so they're distracted from issues that actually matter.
Well, everybody knows if you can't pay your rent, you can't get a decent job, you're down on your luck, you're dealing with an opioid addiction. We know who's not to blame. It's not Purdue Pharma. It's not like the oligarchs, of course. It's Negroes, the Latins for coming over and crossing the border. It's the libs in Sesame Street. All your problems can be blamed on them, of course. We know the truth, Anna.
How can you dislike Big Bird? Such a lovable character. I can do away with Kermit. I'm not a big fan, but still. I'm just kidding. I don't care at all. Anyway, we got to take a break, final break of the show. But when we come back, we've got more news for you, including a poll on how Americans really feel about cancel culture. We've got that and more coming up. Stay tuned.
I'm old enough that I remember when Captain Crunch put the berries in there.
Yay, crunch berries!
And I was like, ooh, the fake berries.
Remember?
We're gonna try that.
We did a story back in the day about how a woman sued, General Mills.
She'd been eating it for 4 years, believing that it was actual berries. Yeah. She's like, these aren't real berries at all. Yeah. I'm like, I got news for you. Captain Crunch isn't really a captain or a person. Joining me now, legendary whistleblower and American hero, Edward Snowden. First question is, hey, where are you?
I'm in my apartment in Moscow.
All of a sudden, in the studio, Jim Gaffigan, everybody.
Mental illness is, completely undiagnosed in our society.
It's not about a particular administration. It's about a broken system of power, and through that, really, the instrumentalization of a system of not justice, but injustice.
People understand whether they claim to deny climate change or not. Our collective house is in crisis. We're also dealing with the legacy of 40 years of economic policies that have made people's lives more precarious.
Sometimes you gotta force people into their humanity. Sometimes you have to shake people into empathy.
Senator Elizabeth Warren joins us in the studio.
Healthcare is a basic human right, and we are fighting for basic human rights.
In order to actually achieve that vision of everyone having access to the same resources and getting to determine the outcome of their life, we have a lot of work to do, and it needs to start right now.
Here's something you may not know. When you deposit your money in a big bank, it doesn't just sit, safe and secure, in a vault. Instead, your money could end up building oil pipelines, mining for coal, or drilling in the Arctic. So if you're concerned about the planet, give your money something good to do. Make the move to green with Aspiration's fossil fuel-free account and join the thousands each week who are switching to save their dollars and save the planet at the same time.
Welcome to the Damage Report. I'm John Idarola. This is gonna be a big one.
What Donald Trump has done as president has cut taxes for the wealthy and made life better for rich people. But he's made life worse for poor people.
We're making America great again by throwing more money at the military to destroy other countries because that makes us great instead of investing it in ourselves.
That it's Donald Trump and it's Stephen Miller. The choosing is based on wanting to create cruel and inhumane conditions to scare other people away from ever coming to the United States.
The opportunity to make money off of tragedy is the American way.
There's only one place to put garbage people: in the trash.
We've never had so much access to so much information with so little idea of what the hell is going on.
What does enforcing our borders have to do with traumatizing children? Absolutely nothing.
I think a sane person could say the current situation we have right now is radical. But what we're doing is literally making the world more like hell. That's a warning sign.
ShopTYT.com now has books. One of them is Ryan Grimm's book, We've Got People. That's a saying that AOC said, they've got money, we've got people. It's the best tracing of the AOC victory I have seen anywhere. It's the most accurate, and it's got great details. The book actually goes all the way back to Jesse Jackson and how he's the original Bernie Sanders. If you wanna know how we're gonna win going forward, those lessons are super important, and they're in Ryan's book. So check it out right now at ShopTYT.com.
We found the perfect person to lead the army. Allison Hartson.
The establishment media works hand in glove with our corporate legislators, and our corporate legislators work hand in glove with the corporation. And we're going to make it so that it's a decentralized force throughout the country so that we can quickly identify stories, quickly identify troll farms, and go in and neutralize the enemy, and then start building responsible media throughout the country and on every platform available.
Welcome back, everyone. Let's get to the issue of cancel culture, a pretty divisive topic, especially if you ever follow threads about it online. But recently there was a poll about cancel culture that I wanted to share with you all. So, according to the latest poll on the topic, the majority of Americans, regardless of their political affiliation, believe that cancel culture has gone too far. Now, this poll was done by The Hill and Harris, and here are the details. Here's what they found. 71% of registered voters said that they strongly or somewhat believe that cancel culture has gone too far. By contrast, only 29% of respondents said that they believe a little or not at all. Now, I think that this is a fascinating survey, specifically because of the fact that this is a hotly contested topic, right? You have one group that says cancel culture is completely made up. The opposing group says, no, cancel culture is absolutely real. I've been pretty clear about where I stand on the issue. I think that cancel culture is certainly made up when it comes to individuals like Barry Weiss or people who are public figures who seem to get promoted the more they complain about cancel culture. But there are just normal, ordinary people who do end up being the worst victims of cancel culture, right? So we had shared a story about a video that had been taken out of context, and the video was taken out of context to make it seem as though two people were mocking the murder of George Floyd. But it turns out that that's not what they were doing at all. The longer video in context just showed two individuals like play fighting with each other. And so the people involved in that video got fired from their jobs. They suffered some pretty serious consequences. So when you look at ordinary people, I do think that there is some truth to the issue of cancel culture, right? But if Dave Chappelle, for instance, gets some backlash, but he's able to keep putting out more specials on Netflix, no, I don't think that that's an example of cancel culture. Let me give you some more details. If you break it down by party lines, 76% of Republicans, unsurprisingly, but also 70% of Democrats and 68% of independents said that they either strongly or somewhat agree that cancel culture has gone too far. Now, Waz, you talk about this quite a bit. I've seen you discuss it on your Twitch stream and in other contexts. And I wanted you to kind of weigh in on your thoughts in response to this poll.
I mean, all it shows is that, and I hate to both sides this, but like both sides want to cancel people, right? We want to cancel Dave because he's saying mean things about the genitals of trans people on his comedy special. And we want to cancel my man Mark Lamont Hill for being anti-Israeli regime, right? Like anti-Bibi Netanyahu and their policy towards the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, right? Like both are true, you know what I mean? And then, I remember the young lady from Teen Vogue getting fired outright for tweets that were 10 years old. Like, it's true, it's rampant on both ends of the spectrum, and it's ridiculous. Again, for the 3 millionth time, my general rule of thumb is that people probably shouldn't be fired from their jobs just for things that they say on the internet. Right, save for being like, yo, everybody go kill this person, or everybody go harm this person and causing bodily harm or financial harm or some type of actual tangible harm to people. I think it's ridiculous, and then of course, when right wingers try to do it for the various reasons that they do it, it's equally ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I don't think it's both sidesing it when it's absolutely true, right? So We shared an example on the show today of a principal in Texas whose contract was not renewed because the board of trustees unanimously voted against renewing his contract because they're convinced that he's like teaching critical race theory or allowing that curriculum within the high school. So in essence, the right wing has basically destroyed someone's livelihood over a manufactured culture war. They have canceled him because of this made up nonsense, right? And then, on the other hand, I shared that example earlier of people who just immediately react to a video they see online that purports to show one thing, but then you come to find out that it was taken out of context and people suffered very serious consequences because of that, right? And I think part of the issue, well, there are a lot of different things at play. I don't know if this was always true in America or if this is a relatively new phenomenon, but we need to be willing to have difficult conversations and we need to provide space for people to make mistakes, but also to progress and get better, right? I think that right now what we're seeing is absolutely no incentives to improve as a person. And like recently I corrected errors that I had made in reporting the Kyle Rittenhouse story. Not because I'm looking to like gain favor toward anyone, but because I actually care about the audience knowing the truth about the trial. And if I messed up, I'm gonna admit that I messed up. That's what I did. And the reaction that you get from people, it's like, no, you're worried about a lawsuit, or I'm not worried about a lawsuit at all. I was going off of reported news that was inaccurate. We didn't do original reporting on that story and I messed up and I corrected the record. But it's like this, there's this environment that just really does not incentivize people to do better, to have difficult conversations or to admit when they're wrong. So people end up kind of like digging their heels and refusing to change because if you ever admit guilt or if you ever apologize, instead of saying, hey, it takes a big person to do that, everyone on the other side is like, you're a bad person and you intentionally lied and you should be fired. That kind of stuff drives me nuts, especially when it comes to getting people fired. I think there's some context where it makes sense. Like if we're talking about, let's say, a teacher who has a history of saying awful racist things. We're talking about an educator who needs to educate students from all different backgrounds, But in other situations, like what good is it gonna do for society if Dave Chappelle is like blacklisted completely? Is your life really gonna get better? I don't think so.
Yeah, and there was another recent example where a young white lady yelled at this black dude at a dog park in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, and she told him to go back to his hood, and they took it as a racial thing and all of this, and then the dude got on Twitter and was like, "This white woman was racist. Let's tag her employer. Let's get her fired right now." We shouldn't be rewarding that type of look at me behavior. I'm sorry, we shouldn't reward that. What that dude was doing, unacceptable, super freaking corny. Nobody deserves to get fired because they yelled at some guy at a dog park on their day off. I'm sorry, bro. I think this woman, she worked in like, I forget, like PR or something. It's not like she worked in some highly vital job. It's like, dude, it's gone way too far. And just the internet lynch mob aspect of it all is the part that's most annoying. It's just like, guys, give it a break.
Yeah. Well, let's try to squeeze in one more story before we end the main show. We're gonna talk about an exchange between Geraldo Rivera and Jan Bongino. All right, so let's do it. Geraldo Rivera has been getting into more and more tussles on Sean Hannity's show, especially when Dan Bongino is on, and especially when the topic has to do with coronavirus vaccines. In fact, this segment ended with Rivera slamming the Fox News host for fighting mandates while being vaccinated themselves. Let's watch.
I think that you cannot have a right of privacy that I'm in your room with my grandchildren who are not vaccinated because they're too young, and you lied about your vaccine status and you sneeze on my grandchildren. You know, that could be a crime. That is absolutely so and self-involved, and his apology was a bunch of baloney.
He doesn't owe anybody an apology. Aaron Rodgers doesn't owe Geraldo or anyone else jack squat. Aaron Rodgers was given his body by God. He is ward of his own body. Whether he chooses to disclose his immunization status or not isn't Geraldo or anyone else's business.
Now, the Aaron Rodgers angle makes this a little bit of a sports story, but I am curious to hear you weigh in, especially when it comes to the defense that we just heard from Bongino.
I mean, it's a ludicrous defense because vaccine mandates have existed for hundreds of years. Nobody gave a damn. And also, like, we do stuff like seatbelt laws where it's like, no, you don't get to just kill yourself in a moving vehicle, or I don't know, we regulate stuff like drugs where it's like, you don't get to just do this to your body. Like this idea that it's your body and you get to do whatever the hell you want, regardless of the effects on the public, just doesn't exist. However, Aaron Rodgers, like, I'm not gonna lie, football players bash their heads, their brains together for a living. Not taking a vaccine in comparison to that, it kind of feels like we're being willfully ignorant about what it is these guys do for a living, which is they harm their bodies all the time.
Right, I mean, that's such a great point. And honestly, that point can apply to every American. Right, like we're scarfing down Doritos and drinking big gulps of like Mountain Dew while simultaneously complaining about the vaccine. It's pretty incredible stuff. And look, I gotta give Geraldo Rivera a little bit of credit because he does speak out when he disagrees with Fox News hosts and contributors. And he is in hostile territory when he does that. In fact, he ended that segment by calling out the hypocrisy of Fox News hosts who themselves are vaccinated and protected against coronavirus, but tend to put out, vaccine nonsense, like, to basically persuading people against getting vaccinated. Because look, it's not really about keeping people safe. It's not really about educating people or informing people. It's about turning every single element of the coronavirus pandemic into a culture war issue. Conservatives have done a fantastic job with that, even though members of their own audiences have gotten tremendously sick and even died as a result of that. That's capitalism, baby. All right, well, we've got an awesome bonus episode for you guys. Waz is kind enough to stick around and do these awesome stories, including a brothel incentivizing people to get vaccinated. How are they doing it? Sexy time. We've got that and more. See you at the post game.